Summary of the Master's spiritual experiences. We have now come to the end of Sri Ramakrishna's sadhana, the period of his spiritual discipline. As a result of his supersensuous experiences, he reached certain conclusions regarding himself and spirituality in general. His conclusions about himself may be summarized as follows. First, he was an incarnation of God, a specially commissioned person whose spiritual experiences were for the benefit of humanity. Whereas it takes an ordinary man a whole life's struggle to realize one or two phases of God, he had, in a few years, realized God in all his phases. Second, he knew that he had always been a free soul, that the various disciplines through which he had passed were really not necessary for his own liberation, but were solely for the benefit of others. Thus, the terms liberation and bondage were not applicable to him. As long as there are beings who consider themselves bound, God must come down to earth as an incarnation to free them from bondage. Just as a magistrate must visit any part of his district in which there is trouble. Third, he came to foresee the time of his death. His words with respect to this matter were literally fulfilled. About spirituality in general, the following were his conclusions. First, he was firmly convinced that all religions are true, that every doctrinal system represents a path to God. He had followed all the main paths, and all had led him to the same goal. He was the first religious prophet recorded in history to preach the harmony of religions. Second, the three great systems of thought, known as dualism, qualified non-dualism, and absolute non-dualism, Dvaita, Vishishta Advaita, and Advaita, he perceived to represent three stages in man's progress toward the ultimate reality. They were not contradictory, but complementary, and suited to different temperaments. For the ordinary man with strong attachment to the senses, a dualistic form of religion, prescribing a certain amount of material support, such as music and other symbols, is useful. A man of God realization transcends the idea of worldly duties. But the ordinary mortal must perform his duties, striving to be unattached and to surrender the results to God. The mind can comprehend and describe the range of thought and experience up to the Vishishta Advaita and no further. the Advaita, the last word in spiritual experience, is something to be felt in Samadhi, for it transcends mind and speech. From the highest standpoint, the Absolute and its manifestation are equally real. The Lord's name, His abode, and the Lord Himself are of the same spiritual essence. Everything is spirit, the difference being only in form. Third, Sri Ramakrishna realized the wish of the Divine Mother that through him she should found a new order, consisting of those who would uphold the universal doctrines illustrated in his life. Fourth, his spiritual insight told him that those who were having their last birth on the mortal plane of existence, and those who had sincerely called on the Lord even once in their lives, must come to him. During this period, Sri Ramakrishna suffered several bereavements. The first was the death of a nephew named Akshay. After the young man's death, Sri Ramakrishna said, "Akshay died before my very eyes, but it did not affect me in the least. I stood by and watched a man die. It was like a sword being drawn from its scabbard. I enjoyed the scene and laughed and sang and danced over it. They removed the body and cremated it. But the next day, as I stood there, pointing to the southwest veranda of his room, I felt a racking pain for the loss of Akshay, as if somebody was squeezing my heart like a wet towel. I wondered at it and thought that the mother was teaching me a lesson. I was not much concerned even with my own body, much less with a relative. But if such was my pain at the loss of a nephew, how much more must be the grief of the householders at the loss of their near and dear ones." In 1871, Mathur died, and some 5 years later, Shambhu Malik, who, after Mathur's passing away, had taken care of the master's comfort. In 1873, died his elder brother Rameshwar, and in 1876, his beloved mother. These bereavements left their imprint on the tender human heart of Sri Ramakrishna, albeit he had realized the immortality of the soul and the illusoriness of birth and death. In March 1875, about a year before the death of his mother, the master met Keshab Chandra Sen. The meeting was a momentous event for both Sri Ramakrishna and Keshab. Here, the master for the first time came into actual contact with a worthy representative of modern India.